So we're moving now into the 4th century. And the 4th century, probably more so than any of the centuries before, will have a significant impact on Christian history. Now, certainly, in many respects, every development that has taken place throughout the history of Christianity is significant, or could be potentially significant. Not all of them are, but sometimes they could be. But there are a couple of places throughout Christian history that just have a monumental impact on the shape of Christianity across the world. The 4th century is one of those. The 16th and the Reformation is another one of those. The 18th and 19th centuries as well are some of the ones that have, I would say, if I had to pick some of the ones that had the most impact, those would rise to the top of the list as times that have had a very significant impact on how Christianity has changed and developed. And so we're starting with the 4th century, because by the time we're done with looking at the 4th century, we'll have moved from Christianity being a persecuted religion and facing perhaps the height of persecution under the Roman Empire to Christianity being the official state religion. Now, all in the span of just a few decades. Really not even the entirety of the 100 years. Christianity will become the official religion of the Roman Empire in 381. So before the century is over, there will be a significant impact. But we start with the developments that take place under the rule of Diocletian. Diocletian had become emperor in 284. And we briefly mentioned him in the context of the end of the 3rd century. But his rule has much more of a significant impact in the 4th. And when Diocletian comes to power, not only is he significant religiously, but it's important to see that he makes some changes politically as well that are significant. Diocletian comes to power and feels that the empire has gotten too large for any one individual, any one man, to be in control of. And so he decides that he's going to separate the empire into East and West with separate rulers, but ultimately, he's the ultimate authority, but there are rulers charged with these different religions. So breaking it geographically between West and East. In the West, that would include places like Great Britain, Gaul, or modern-day France, Rome, Italy, and most of North Africa that was under control of the Romans. The eastern part would include places like Greece, Asia Minor, or what's now Turkey, Palestine, Egypt, Persia, and the regions of Eastern Europe that are now places like Bosnia, Croatia, Serbia, etc. And so he breaks the empire into 2 regions, and then he goes further and breaks the leadership into 2 regions as well. So leaders over the 2 regions, but also then a 2-level structure, right? So that over each region there are 2 levels of leaders. In the East, Diocletian is the Augustus. In the West, Maximian is the Augustus. That's the upper level. In the East, a man named Galerius, who we'll talk more about in a little bit, is the Caesar. Right? So the top level is the Augustus, the secondary level is the Caesar. In the West, a man named Constantius Chlorus is Caesar. So the plan is, essentially, that when the Augustus dies, or if Augustus steps down, so there's kind of this expectation that an Augustus is going to serve about 10 years. So when it's time for the Augustus to leave, the Caesar will raise into the Augustus, and a new Caesar will be chosen in both the East and the West. The empire is then further divided into other regional types of ordinances, provinces, dioceses, which will become important in the Middle Ages for Catholicism. Now, as it starts off, it doesn't appear that Diocletian is particularly anti-Christian. And so, had things gone on the way they had before, with just ruling over the empire by himself, perhaps nothing would have happened to Christians during that 4th century, and perhaps we would have a completely different situation with Christianity. But Diocletian's Caesar, Galerius, has some fears and suspicions about the influence that Christians are beginning to have in the government, in the army, in the emperor's household. Diocletian's wife, for example, and possibly even his mother Valeria, his wife Prisca and his mother Valeria, may have been Christians. Or at the very least, they probably were catechumens. Now we can't be absolutely sure they were, but it appears from some of the record at the time that there were many Christians in the household, perhaps even in his close family. Diocletian will visit the oracle of Apollo in the city of Miletus, and he is told to attack the church. And this is early in his reign. Persecutions of Christians will begin in the army. Again, a lot of this is being kind of stirred up by Galerius. Diocletian will release an edict expelling all Christians from the legions. Now, remember, we talked about in the 3rd century how people like Tertullian were very against the idea of Christians being in the army. Not only, some of it was pacifism, but a lot of it had to do with the army or soldiers being required to be involved in idolatrous or pagan practices. But obviously not all Christians followed that, because there are Christians in the legions in the 4th century. And a lot of this is also being spurred on by a governor in Asia Minor who is concerned that the empire doesn't have a unified religion. And so Christians, to him, to Galerius, to others, look like an empire within the empire. There's this group that's distinct from the empire, and something could happen. They could cause a revolt. They could destabilize the empire. And so Diocletian orders that Christians are to be flogged if they will not sacrifice. Eventually, however, he raises that up to executions. If they will not sacrifice to the gods, they will be executed. Christian buildings were to be destroyed and leveled. Christians were removed from government. Their books were ordered to be destroyed. They had their property taken away. 2 fires that occur are blamed on Christians. And so it continues to just kind of ramp up. Originally, a lot of the focus appears to have been focusing on the leaders, but eventually everyone in the Roman Empire is ordered to sacrifice to the gods. From a Christian standpoint, much like the persecution of Decius, a lot of Christians, especially new Christians, are caught off guard. Previously, there had been a lot of peace. Christians weren't subject to large-scale persecution. There were certainly some places in some ways, but Christians had lived relatively at peace for several decades prior to Diocletian. And so much like it happened in the Decian persecution, some gave in, some fled in order to escape persecution, and many lapsed from Christianity. Eventually, Diocletian will order all of the Christian ministers, the clergy, to be sent into prison. But then that is not good enough, because they're in prison. You either sacrifice or you go to prison. Fine, we'll go to prison. Well, then he orders, all right, if you're in prison, you still have to sacrifice. Right? So it's just not good enough to have them in prison now anymore. Galerius will eventually become emperor, will become Augustus, when Diocletian steps down because he gets sick around the year 305. So from 304 to 311 are the most intense years of this persecution. Galerius issues an edict that all in the empire, especially Christians, must sacrifice or die. Thousands of Christians are put to death. Sometimes even whole villages will die in the persecution. Over in the west, Maximian, who had been the Augustus, steps down. And so Constantius Chlorus becomes the Augustus, had been the Caesar. Severus becomes the new Caesar in the west. And so you have Galerius on the one side, you have Constantius Chlorus on the other side. But not everybody's happy with that choice. The legions actually have their own choice for Caesar and perhaps even Augustus, a man named Constantine, who is the son of Constantius Chlorus. During this time, Maxentius, another popular soldier, decides he's going to take over Rome. And in doing this, or around the same time, Severus, who was the Caesar, commits suicide. Galerius, over in the east, invades Rome to try and kick out Maxentius. Some of his troops will defect to Maxentius. In all of this, Christians are still persecuted. But most of the persecution is taking place in the east. The Western government doesn't seem as interested in persecuting Christians. They're not as focused on it as Galerius is. Galerius orders that any food is to be sprinkled with sacrificial blood to try and even taint the food that Christians are eating. Christians are sent to the mines. The list of martyrs continues to grow. In the year 310, however, Galerius will get sick. And his illness will continue, his health will continue to deteriorate throughout 310 and into 311. Finally, in the year 311, on what would be for us, April 30th, Galerius issues the Edict of Toleration. Here's just a part of that. Remember, this is Galerius writing this. With all the laws which we have decreed for the good of the state, we have sought to restore the ancient rules and traditional discipline of the Romans. We have particularly sought to have Christians who had abandoned the faith of their ancestors return to the truth. After the promulgation of our edict ordering all to return to the ancient customs, many obeyed for fear of danger, and we were forced to punish others. But there are still many who persist on their opinions, and we are aware that they neither worship nor serve the gods, nor even their own God. Therefore, moved by our mercy to be benevolent toward all, it has seemed just to us to extend to them our pardon, and allow them to be Christians once again, and once again gather in their assemblies as long as they do not interfere with public order. In return for our tolerance, Christians will be required to pray to their God for us, for the public good, and for themselves, so that the state may enjoy prosperity and they may live in peace. Now, looking on that, what are some of the things that kind of catch your eye? What do you really kind of notice and stand out to you?
They said Christians don't even follow their other God, and they're trying to make their gods serve them.
Okay.
For the sake of the state.
What else do you notice?
I feel like we're requiring them to do the thing that they were called to do in the first place.
Okay. You've been saying for 200 years that you pray for the emperor, so pray for the emperor. What else do you notice? Who does Galerius put this all on? Right? It's the Christian's fault. We We were forced into persecuting him, right? We had to do it. And so there's this idea of Galerius is trying to present it as, that we wouldn't want to persecute people, but they forced us into it. But now we've decided that, we're going to be benevolent. Right? Your illness has nothing to do with this, does this, Galerius? Right? You're seeking anyone to try and solve this. Galerius would die 5 days after releasing the Edict of Toleration. Right? So whether or not Christians were praying for his recovery or not, God didn't answer that prayer or the prayer of Galerius. But what we have here is kind of a power instability that's taking place in Rome and in the Roman Empire. And so Constantine decides that he is now going to get involved in this as well. And he's the son of Constantius Chlorus. His father had been a Caesar and an Augustus, but Maxentius had kind of taken over Rome. And so Constantine will march on Rome, claiming that Maxentius is a usurper, and so he should not have any authority. There are a couple of different versions about what happened on the days before the Battle of Milvian Bridge, which is kind of the main battle in all of this. There is a pagan version that says that Constantine had a vision at the temple of Apollo that he would be king. And that's what's driving a lot of this. The Christian version comes in two forms. One says that Constantine, the night before the Battle of Milvian Bridge, has a dream. Another is that he has a vision, sees something in the sky. Essentially, both the dream and the vision are the event that's said to happen is that he is told, under this sign, conquer. Right? And it's either the cross or the key row that we've talked about. That he is essentially told in this dream or in this vision that he is to take the sign of Christianity, and it is under that sign that he will become the ruler. So he orders his soldiers to put the key row symbol, right, those first two letters of Christos in Greek, put that on his shields of his soldiers. And Constantine ends up being successful. Right? Wins the battle, will eventually establish himself as Augustus in the western part of the Roman Empire. Now, Constantine is, he's not the sole Roman Empire, right? There's still an Augustus in the east, a man named Licinius. Persecution will continue in the east under Licinius off and on. It's not a constant thing. It's not eastern-wide, but it'll happen off and on. In the west, though, Constantine is expressing some favors to Christians. He'll provide funds to the clergy, returns property that had been taken from churches back to them. Eventually, between Licinius and Constantine, the two of them agreed to stop the persecution of Christians. And apparently, Constantine had encouraged Licinius as well to accept the Christian God. Licinius doesn't do so, but they issue the Edict of Milan in the year 313.